Hello there and welcome to BoBeats, and today we're checking out the TR-06 from Roland. It's based on their ACB technology, so it's a digital emulation of the classic TR-606 drum machine. But it's important to start off with the fact that it's not just an emulation of the classic 606 sound. In terms of functionality, in terms of sound, there's a lot more going on here. So Roland sent this drum machine over to me to check out and make this video, and to make it even more interesting, we're not only going to do a review of this drum machine, but we're also going to compare the Roland TR-06 with the Behringer RD-6. And you might wonder why. Well, first and foremost for science, and secondly because I think that there are a lot of consumers, a lot of you viewers out there who are interested in which one of these you should pick up. So later in the video we'll compare the two. So let's get hands-on here. So first off, we have the step sequencer down here, and when we are in write mode and we press play here, we can put down trigs or steps. So here we have the kick drum. We can select the snare drum. And we have the volume for them. And if we want to, we can use this button here to live record into the step sequencer as well. So let's add some toms. And some hi-hats. We can change the tempo. And what I really like about this boutique version of the 606 is that they've added some new features. For example, you can do probability. So for example, here, if we go to the snare drum here, you select the step, turn down the probability. And we can also add fills. Hold down menu, press a step. And you can also adjust the velocity of a step by holding down a step and turning the accent here. So there's 10 different levels of velocity. So there are 7 different sounds, and we actually have one sequencer track here for the accents as well. So if I press play here, we can put down accents, and we can change the probability of the accents as well. And we can change the strength of the accent. There's also different modes. So we're in write mode, so it's under pattern, which means that we're basically doing changes to the drum pattern. And then we can go into play. So when we're in play, you can see, for example, that we're not seeing the individual steps of the tracks. Instead, we're changing the patterns or chaining them together like this. And And then we have the next mode here, which is the track mode. It's basically a song mode where you can chain different patterns together. You can also do it non-linearly, so you can have like pattern 1 first and then pattern 6. So let me show you how this is done by going to right here. So let's start here. We're on number 1 here. So measure 1, I think, and we select number 9. Press this button. And then we press play. And in terms of pattern memory, you can have 128 patterns here stored. And something that's really cool as well is that when you turn it off and put it back on again, it's basically where you left it. I really like that. It makes it feel more like an instrument. So while you do have the 606 sounds, you can also change them up quite a bit. So for example, we go into the menu here. It's basically just one level. So we can select tuning here, for example. And here we can select whatever sound we want to change the tuning for. We can change the decay. We also have panning. And we can also add attack to the kick drum. As well as snap to the snare. For the toms, we have noise. But what's also really cool is that we're not stuck with the 606 sounds. We can press these two buttons here. Here we have the sounds that we can change. So we can change the kick here. More saturated and more booming kick. So if you're like me and you don't really like the cymbals usually on these older drum machines, you can change it to a clap instead. And we of course have some master effects, so we have distortion. And going to the menu, we can actually change the type of distortion. So this is a bit crusher. And there's a filter. So high pass, low pass. There's also a delay section. And you can set individual sends here. So for example, the cymbal here is sending way too much. And I want to send some more for the toms. And you can tempo sync the delay, and there's also different, so you have different types. So with delay type here, so we have number 1 here, so the delay. Of course, with the delay, you can get these kind of flangery and chorusy type effects. And there's also reverb. And to mute stuff, we go into menu here and we have the first thing. So basically just press menu, mute is always the first thing here, and you can just mute whatever you want. We also have pattern clear here, very simple if you want to clear a pattern, for example. So when we are in write mode here, we can just hold down a pattern here, press clear, and now we've cleared it. And if you don't want to go into the menu, what you can do is just hold either menu or step loop, and you can change stuff for the selected sound here. So for example, the snare. So by holding either of these buttons and using these three knobs here, we have control over sound parameters. Another cool thing you can do is actually you can randomize a pattern. So menu, tap. And in terms of performance control, we have, for example, the ability to shift steps back and forth. It can also use the trig input, I think, to do this, to manipulate the back and forth shifting of steps. And we also have step loop. On the back of the unit there's a micro USB connection that you can use to power the unit, but also send audio and MIDI to a computer. You can actually send individual tracks over USB, so you can multi-track it into your DAW. There's a stereo output as well as a headphones output, and both share the same volume control. Using the mix input you get a stereo input that you can also record into a computer, so basically this boutique is like an audio interface. A limited one, but one all the same. There's also a MIDI in and out port. And if we check under the unit, there's a little speaker. Now, it's nothing to write home about, but it's there and you can use it. And the unit is battery powered, so you can take it with you on the go. In terms of build quality, it's actually very solid. It feels really good to the touch. The unit also has 5 trigger outputs. You can use it to sequence 5 drum voices, for example, on a Eurorack system. So let's talk about some pros and cons of the Roland TR-06. Firstly, I think it sounds very impressive. I think that when you compare it against samples, for example, because that's always an argument I see, why shouldn't I just pick up a sample pack? I really don't think there's any comparison to be made there. I think that this sounds so much better, especially when we start tweaking the sounds, changing the character of the sound. It just holds up. There's not like a lot of aliasing, no clicks and pops. It just sounds really good. Yeah. Secondly, while this is an emulation of the 606, there's still some very interesting sound shaping possibilities on here. There's a decent amount of control that I hope I've showed you here in the video, so you can make some quite varied sounds with it. Third positive is that there's actually a lot going on with the sequencer that I like, especially compared to the RD-6. So we have step probability, we have fills, we have master probability, and you can also do 32 steps. And all of this together, makes it a fun experience, makes it creative, makes it useful. So that's a big plus for me anyway. The fourth positive is the size. I actually really enjoyed this form factor for a drum machine, not so much for synthesizers where I want more hands-on control and the knobs just become too small or it's easy to accidentally hit something. This is not a problem on a drum machine. So I think the form factor is actually really nice. Fifth positive is of course that it's battery powered, so you can take it with you. And the last positive is that I think that the menu system is very well designed. At first I was a little worried because you had to go into menus to change things, but then I found out of course the secondary functions, but also that the menu system, it's not very complicated, it's easy to understand. Next up, let's talk about the negatives. And first I just want to mention that I'm not a big fan of the fact that I have to start the sequencer to put down steps. I understand that it's part of the design. The RD-6 here works the same way, but to me it's kind of annoying. I wish they've gone a different route design-wise, but then of course it wouldn't have been a 606. So yeah, I kind of see why they did it. I just don't like it. Second negative is that there's of course not a knob per function here. So you have to use the different commands here in order to access everything. So if memorizing shift commands isn't your thing and using menus is out of the question, then yeah, I guess there are the drum machines that have a knob per function instead that works better in this regard. There is a built-in speaker. It's not really a negative, but with a drum machine, this small speaker just, yeah, it doesn't really do it for me. There's not enough oomph in the sound to really feel it. So it just sounds like a toy drum machine when you have the speakers on. But it's there. It's not really a negative. It's what it is. But other than that, I was hard pressed to find anything negative to say about it, which isn't really that surprising. The boutiques have been around for a long time, and it's a solid lineup of synthesizers and drum machines. Next up in the video, I want to do a comparison between the new Roland Boutique and this Behringer here, the RD-6. Now, full disclosure, I've been working with Roland products for quite some time, and I don't really have that much experience with Behringer products. I haven't been featuring them a lot here on the channel. And no, I'm not getting paid to do this comparison. I actually think that Roland and Behringer probably don't like that I'm doing the comparison, but I'm going to do it anyway for you, the viewer, the consumer, because I think a lot of people are interested in these two products and will be comparing them when they're looking to buy something like a 606 reproduction or clone or something that emulates that kind of sound. For me personally, it's about you being able to make an informed decision on whatever product you pick up. That's my end goal. I also want to get it out there that these are actually quite complicated devices to compare, because one is a very strict analog reproduction or clone of an older synthesizer, whereas the Roland is much more feature-packed. Basically, in every single way, the Roland can do everything, except for a few things, that the Behringer can. But it's digital and it costs more. And because people online do tend to compare the boutiques with the Behringer clones, I felt it was time to do a proper comparison so you also can see kind of what your money is getting you, because there's different values here to be had. Neither is bad, but they also offer very different things. Now, in terms of sound, I'm going to let you be the decider of that. I'm going to do a blind test first. And since they're quite different in sound, I've tried to get the Roland as close to the Behringer as possible, but you will hear some similarities and some differences for sure. So let's roll the blind test. So now I'm dying to hear, which one did you prefer? Was it A or was it B? Which one did you prefer, or did you prefer neither or both of them? Let me know in the comment section. Go right before I tell you which is which. Go right now. Did you like A the most or B the most, or did it feel similar to you? Let me know. I'm always curious to hear. So here's the big reveal. Behringer was A and Roland was B. I think some of you might have picked it up on the distortion, because the distortion is very different in how it kind of crunches up the sound on these two units. It's very different. Now let's play the comparison again, but with the units side by side. tried getting the Roland as close to the Behringer as possible. The Roland can of course sound in a multitude of different ways because you can change the sounds. And the snare and the hi-hat was the thing that was hardest to match. I don't even know if I used a cymbal. Did I? I might have forgotten. I'm not a big cymbal fan. But anyway, it was quite hard because the snare and hi-hats on the Behringer sounds quite different from anything that you can do on the Roland. So whether you like that or not, that's up to you. I just want to note also that in my tests, the sound out of the TR-06 is a little bit more compressed, so it will be easier to just fit in a mix, whereas the sound of the TD6 is a little bit more similar to something from a drum brute. It's a little bit more wild and unpredictable. It's not a bad thing, it's just what I noticed. And in general, I do think it's a feature of analog drum machines in general that you need some post-processing to really make it work in a mix. So let's do a quick feature comparison. Analog synthesizer, digital synthesizer. Battery powered, not battery powered. Can also be powered over the USB, so you can use a power bank. This one can only be powered from the DC. This one can use its USB to transfer stereo audio. It also have a mix input that you can use to transfer audio into your DAWs. It's sort of like an audio interface. You can also use the USB for MIDI. This one can only use the USB for MIDI. No audio capabilities over USB. Behringer comes with a power adapter, the Roland does not. I don't think it even includes a USB cable. The Behringer has a recommended 15 minutes of warm-up time, whereas the Roland has no warm-up time whatsoever. The Behringer have individual track outputs, and you don't find that on the Roland. But the Boutique works as an audio interface for recording external sources as well as doing multi-tracking into a DAW. But you do have 6 trigger outputs that you can use to control, say, a Eurorack, mono, stereo, no panning, panning, no aux input with gain as well. One master distortion that you turn on and off. The Roland has 4 different drive types and also different send effects. You can have one send effect at a time, but there are different ones. The Behringer actually has 8 analog voices, whereas the Roland has 7 digital voices. The Behringer, because it's analog, is a lot noisier than the Roland, especially when you turn the distortion on, which isn't strange in any way, but it's something you should note. Now here comes something really subjective, sound. I do think that the distortion on the Behringer is slightly more interesting because there's some really nice sweet spots that you can get to with it. So I do prefer the analog distortion on the Behringer, but I do think that the Roland offers a lot better sound out of the box. So if you're not using the individual outputs on the Behringer, the sound is what it is. But here you can actually tweak it a lot more. So if that's important to you out of the box, then the Roland has so much more to offer. In terms of pattern memory, the Roland has 128 patterns, whereas the Behringer only has 32. Next up, we have to compare something that is really important when we talk about price, and that is build quality. What kind of materials have they used in these synth or drum machines? So let's start with the Behringer. It might look nice on camera, but when you get it in your hands, it's extremely lightweight. You really understand why it's so cheap. The plastic is fine. The knobs actually have a very nice resistance to them. These knobs are fine. The buttons are okay. And these 2 buttons over here doesn't always register when I press them, so I have to press them really hard. Not too sure about that. But overall, very lightweight, very cheap plastic, and at the price point, that is fine. But don't let anybody tell you that there isn't a substantial quality difference, because the actual unit itself have a much more premium feel. The buttons are way nicer. The knobs are, I'd say, about equal to what's on the Behringer, but the buttons are way nicer. There's an aluminum, I guess, aluminum chassis. So in conclusion, it's a good old you get what you pay for. If you just want the classic 606 sounds, but with individual outputs here so you can process the sounds afterwards, this one is fine, definitely. And if you want something more versatile, portable, smaller, battery powered, with more sound shaping possibilities on the device itself and a much better sequencer, I'd say that the Roland is fine too. Now, I am sorry to say that I don't really care which one you pick up as long as you pick up the one that is right for you. And if you want to pick up either of them, check the top comment for some affiliate links. It's a good way to support the channel if you use those links. So yeah, that was my little comparison.